Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Yes, okay, so September 30th, 2020. We're having an evening program here. We're reading a philosophy discussion, Srila Prabhupada discussing the philosophy of Immanuel Kant with Prabhupada's disciple Sundar Das. So Immanuel Kant, he's a very prominent philosopher from that time period. I think Kant was late 1700s, maybe into the early 1800s, but late 1700s, same as David Hume. I know back in my undergraduate studies at Penn State, while I was still an engineering student, I took an elective in some philosophy course with a Professor Lingus was his name. And in this particular course, we studied three philosophers. We studied one book from Aristotle, one book from Kant, and one book from Nietzsche. So different periods, of course, the Greek and the beginning of the Enlightenment, and then sort of like right towards Nietzsche is like ushering in what became existential, postmodernism, things like that. Nietzsche at the end of the 1800s or something. So from Aristotle, we read a book entitled Nicomachean Ethics. I think it's it's Aristotle's main book on ethics. And I remember I liked it. And Nietzsche's book was also very colorful. Kant's book, I think it was this Critique of Pure Reason, I forget, but whatever it was, we read a book from Kant and it was very difficult. Of course, it was English translation, but I'm sure the German was very difficult too. It was very thick and dense, but enriching for the intellect. So Shama Sundar says, today we are discussing Immanuel Kant. Basically, his philosophy seeks to trace the relationship between a priori ideas, or those ideas of the mind which are independent of sense experience, and the a posteriori ideas or sense impressions. He wants to unify these two positions, so he wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, in which he asked the fundamental question, how are a priori synthetic judgments possible? In other words, how can we decide anything, judge anything? Where does this facility come from? What is the source of knowledge? So Prabhupada says, intelligence. The source of knowledge is intelligence. Intelligence acts through mind, and then some conclusion comes. Man is mortal, so here is a man. Intelligence, he must be mortal. This a priori means I know man is mortal, therefore here is a man, he must be mortal. A priori means before, and what is the other? Shama Sundar. A posteriori means after, sense impressions. So he developed this process for attaining knowledge in 3 steps. The first step he called the transcendental aesthetic. And this is the basic stage which synthesizes sense experience through concepts of time and space. In other words, the mind acts upon sensory perceptions and applies time and space relations to them. So he says that this knowledge of time and space is a priori. It's an internal creation of the mind. Before we sense anything, we have an idea of time and space. So as soon as we sense something, we can apply time and space ideas. Prabhupada, he said something transcendental. Shama Sundar, he calls it the transcendental aesthetic. Prabhupada, transcendental means it is not in my experience, but I get the experience from higher authority, parampara. Shamasundar, I think his definition of transcendental is slightly different. Prabhupada, transcendental means beyond your sense experience. That is the real meaning. You can see the dictionary. Transcendental is that which transcends. Shamasundar, transcendental of an a priori character, not based on experience, intuitively accepted, innate in the mind, super rational, supernatural, consisting of or dealing in or inspired by abstractions. The way he is using transcendental is simply he is trying to understand knowledge through abstraction by abstracting. Okay, so yeah, Kant is very dense. He's a real thinker there. And well, we can see, at least, based on what we get from Shamasundar representing Kant, and always scholars of these philosophers would say that Shamasundar and Hayagriva didn't accurately represent, but really we're just caring about Prabhupada's commentary. So, but okay, we can see, so Kant is not ascribing to the blank slate approach, because blank slate is like there's nothing there, and then we're born, and then things get written on the slate from mom, dad, and society, and like in the whole philosophy of education, including early childhood education, this is a key question. So Kant is asserting, maybe he's postulating, asserting that no, we before any sense experience, there exists some innate conceptions and ideas, some innate knowledge. So he's not coming from a blank slate approach. Okay. So Prabhupada, yeah, and also Kant's, right, this discussion goes on for like 30 pages, and then there's perhaps the longest one, but Prabhupada's commenting on after this on Darwin. Darwin for yes, for like 80 pages. So spends a lot of time on Darwin. So Prabhupada's saying here, Prabhupada says, transcendental knowledge means knowledge received from a source which is beyond the reach of my material senses. That is transcendental. Just like we are reading Bhagavad Gita. So we have no knowledge that there is a spiritual world. But Krishna says that there is another nature, a spiritual nature, beyond this material nature. So we understand through the source of transcendental knowledge, we cannot experience. That is explained. Tasri Krishna Namadi, God, his name, his qualities, his pastimes. Nothing can be understood by these material senses. But if you engage yourself in service, they become revealed. That will become confirmed. Yes, there is Vaikuntha, there is Vrindavan, where Krishna's pastimes are going on, and I am perceiving myself. These things become revealed gradually, not abruptly. You can understand. Therefore, common men cannot understand that they say, going back to home, back to Godhead. What nonsense they are saying. They cannot understand because it is transcendental, beyond the reach of these gross senses. But it is revealed. Sevan mukhe. If you become submissive, if you engage yourself in the service of the Lord, Guru Krishna, and the spiritual master, then these things become revealed. Now, one who has got the knowledge by revelation, nobody can mislead him. Just like we believe in the transcendental abode, Chintamani, Goloka Vrindavan. If somebody pays out millions of dollars and asks you to forget all these things, we cannot do that. If you give him hundreds and thousands of dollars that you believe in this, no, he will not believe. That is transcendental knowledge. So transcendental knowledge is not speculation. It is receiving from higher authority, and gradually, by your service attitude, things become clear to you. That is transcendental. Prabhupada's using this term, it's receiving of the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the Hebrew word for receiving, to receive. So the Kabbalah is the idea is it's received. Whether it's a bona fide parampara, Shabda Brahman, but that's the principle. This is received from God, revealed knowledge. Shyamasundar says, before we were discussing Descartes and Hume. Descartes expressed that all knowledge comes through innate ideas, and Hume said just the opposite. No, all knowledge comes from sense experience. So Kant is trying to unify the two ideas. So Descartes, he was using this kind of logical positivism, empirical method, like Isaac Newton, to try to establish some transcendence, God. But then David Hume, he's coming from the blank slate approach, I know much of modern education, it's based on Hume's philosophy. That's the idea. Like a baby is just born with nothing there, like that.
Spanish name.
Yeah. So Kant's trying to unify the two ideas. Prabhupada, yes, sense experience. Sense experience means purified sense experience. That is seva. Just like I am seeing here Krishna, but others will see a stone. So he is also seeing with his eyes. I am also seeing with the eyes. But my eyes are different from his eyes. Premanjana charita bhakti vilochanena. When the eyes are anointed with love of God, ointment of love of God, then he can see. Just like if one's eyes are diseased, if he applies some eye ointment or lotion, then he sees. So the same senses, the same eyes, unless they are treated and purified, he cannot understand, or he cannot see, or he cannot know. Shyamasundar. He says that thoughts without content are empty, meaning that the mind must have senses in order to fill its thoughts with content. And perceptions without exceptions are blind. In other words, sense impressions without thought are blind. Prabhupada. That thought comes from transcendental knowledge. Thought comes from higher authorities. That is called paroksha. Then with your senses, when you try to understand, that is aparoksha. Then adhokshaja. As I told you, there are 5 stages of acquiring knowledge. Direct perception, pratyaksha, paroksha, receiving knowledge from higher authorities, then apply your senses, come to some conclusion, that is aparoksha. Then transcendental knowledge, adhokshaja, then aprakrita, spiritual knowledge.
That's transcendental and spiritual.
Well, Prabhupada talks about, yes. So Prabhupada, he said, it talks about 5 stages of acquiring knowledge. Direct perception, called pratyaksha.
Which is what the philosopher mainly discuss.
Sense. Or anumana, which is inference based on sense perception.
Mm-hmm.
So Prabhupada saying pratyaksha, then Prabhupada says paroksha, which is receiving knowledge from higher authorities.
Mm.
And 3, apply your senses, come to some conclusion, that is aparoksha. Then transcendental knowledge, adhokshaja, then aprakrita, spiritual knowledge. So I could not give any sort of class on those 5 stages. Prabhupada talks a lot about pratyaksha, anumana, and shabda brahman, so we talk about that a lot. And okay, so these 5 stages, they appear once in Prabhupada's books that I'm familiar with, in a purport in the 4th canto. And I remember every time I read it, I get a little deeper understanding. But then there's this, and I think I've come across 1 or 2 lectures where Prabhupada talks about it, but I I don't have understanding, even understanding what to speak of realization. Like sometimes I might understand intellectually, but here I don't understand the distinctions between the stages. I mean, we can get basically like the first one. Yes, that pratyaksha. So we hear about that a lot. Sense perception, like a child sees the sun as. Okay, so we hear about that one a lot. Then paroksha, receiving knowledge from higher authorities. So how is that different than Shabda Brahman? I don't know.
Well, it seems that the way I interpreted it is authority like Darwin, any authority. Mom, dad, Darwin, my teacher.
Not necessarily spiritual Shabda Brahman authorities.
My teacher.
Okay, so I just have my senses, but then my teacher says 1 + 1 is 2. So
Yeah. So I acquire knowledge from a different place than my senses. I acquire knowledge from higher authority. It's not spiritual knowledge, but it's still acquiring knowledge. It's just a form of acquiring knowledge.
Okay, right. Like my dad said, this is a pillow. So this is a pillow. I acquired knowledge. Okay.
Yeah, it's what I will infer.
I like it. So prajaksha, then 2, paroksha, receiving knowledge from higher authorities. Then 3rd, apply your senses, come to some conclusion, that is aparoksha. Okay. So maybe that's, all right, I've heard from higher authorities, but then as I advance, then I process it. I don't just blindly accept. Yeah, here's this book. What parts of it do I accept? Here's something I heard on TV. Here's something. So
It seems it's higher, like it's using our senses in the service of discrimination.
right, we're using our intelligence.
Yeah.
We're not blindly accepting. We're using our, okay, good. I'm appreciating this talk. So that's 3, paroksha, receiving knowledge from higher authorities. Then 4, 3 is aparoksha, where we apply our senses to come to some conclusion. Then 4, transcendental knowledge, adhokshaja. So maybe transcendental knowledge, that's the Shabda Brahman. That's coming from higher authorities, but a higher authority who's infallible.
Like I'm not this body or the position of the living entities to be servant of Krishna.
Yes, yes. Then 5, Prabhupada's calling it aprakrita, spiritual knowledge. So what I can guess about that is that's when we have, like when Krishna says, prajaksha vaguttamam, he's not talking about stage 1 prajaksha, like my nose smells this, my ear hears it. He's talking about the soul with the soul senses, the soul's mind directly experiencing. So that's the highest.
Nice. So transcendental knowledge, it's the received knowledge from a higher authority, from Krishna also. And then Pradaksha Dhamam is like the knowledge that we receive from our experience with Krishna to our spiritual senses. Nice.
Right. So what Prabhupada's calling here at Hokshaja, which he does use in other places in his teaching, that's what we would call the Shabda Brahman, coming from Parampara, and coming from Parampara. And then to the extent that we're directly experiencing it, as Krishna says in 9.2, then that's aprakrita. Yeah. So it's good. This gives me greater insight into something that's been mysterious for me since I started reading Prabhupada's books.
It seems that there is knowledge acquired by the senses, gross senses, then the knowledge coming from authority, and then that knowledge coming from authority, like affirmed or not by the senses, by your experience. And it seems that transcendental knowledge seems to be the same, but on the other side, there is knowledge coming from authorities that we receive in the heart. But then the next stage, more elevated stage, is to infer them or to experience it through our spiritual senses. It seems that there is a parallel between the two.
Yeah, yeah. First there's projection, and then numbers 2 and 3 mirror 4 and 5. 2 and 3 are kind of on the material shadow side of knowledge, and 4 and 5 are on the transcendental side, but they're mirrors of each other.
That seems like it.
Nice.
Conjoncture.
We're doing permissible speculation.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to read that segment again since we just discussed it. Prabhupada says, that thought comes from transcendental knowledge. Thought comes from higher authorities. That is called paroksha. Yes. And then what we discussed, paroksha, was number 3. Right. Then with your senses, when you try to understand, that is called aparoksha. Yes. Yes. Okay. Then adhokshaja, as I told you, there are 5 stages requiring knowledge: direct perception, projection, paroksha, receiving knowledge from higher authority. Then apply your senses, come to some conclusion. That is aparoksha. Then transcendental knowledge, adhokshaja. Then aprakrita, spiritual knowledge. Shyamasundar, in other words, the thought content comes from higher authorities. Then you apply your senses and the two combine. Prabhupada, to come to some conclusion. That is the source of knowledge which is beyond my senses. Shyamasundar, but I use my senses to come to some conclusion. Prabhupada, just like a higher authority says that there is a spiritual world. Now, how do you come to this conclusion? Yes, there is a spiritual world. How? Unless you apply your senses. Sense application is like this, that I am combination of spirit and matter. That is a fact. So I cannot see the spirit at the present moment, but there is spirit. So I am a combination of spirit and matter. So if there is material world, why is there no spiritual world? This is conclusion. By applying your senses and reason, that there are 2 things, material and spiritual. So if there is possibility of material world, why is there not possibility of spiritual world?
So maybe the second stage is connected with spiritual life. But there is a difference between hearing from authority, like you're not this body, hearing from authority, if you have like if you really want to make advancement in spiritual life, it's better to refrain from the 4 years principle, for example. And then with our senses and our experience, we kind of confirm, and then increase our faith. And then transcendental knowledge then comes after that. So maybe like where I'm seeing myself in that is that I'm more and more accepting knowledge from higher authority, and I'm accepting it because I can see, if I indulge my senses, my spiritual desire or my enthusiasm for Krishna consciousness is less. If I do some action, I can see a reaction. If I chant Hare Krishna, I feel a certain way. If I read Bhagavatam, I feel a certain way, like that. And that's maybe that level of acquiring knowledge, even spiritual knowledge. But then transcendental knowledge is something different, maybe something that's more like it's also higher authority, but maybe even higher authority, I don't know.
Well,
like directly in the heart.
Or that could be knowledge about that which is beyond logic, because like through our senses and mind, we can come to understand, we can come to confirmation of the Shabda Brahman that, yeah, there's spirit and matter, not this body. The body changes, something that's constant. But then maybe the transcendental knowledge, that maybe that refers. But the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Bhagavan Sri Krishna, plays the flute, and the river Yamuna, and the gopis, and things like that. And that's, by logic, we're not going to come to that.
Yeah. So our higher authority will be like Bhagavad Gita, and through our logic and sense perception and experience, we can kind of coming to a conclusion about it. Yeah, I can see all those landmarks, and those landmarks make sense, and I increase my faith. And then Adoksaji is authority giving us knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that I'm not ever being able with my material senses to be able to confirm. And then because I'm not confirming them with my material senses, and the next stage is that they are going to be confirmed by my spiritual senses. Nice.
Yeah, and it's because just a few days ago, I read that purport in the 4th canto in my personal reading. And when I read it, I got more understanding than before, but now I'm getting a lot more than ever. I think we're talking about different possible ways to understand it, right? And there are a few, at least one or a few lectures where Prabhupada talks about it. I wasn't aware of this. I don't recall reading this discussion about Kant. Yeah, and so where we're going, I mean, this is something really in the past 10 years, starting 10 years ago this month. The first Apatov 3 was 10 years ago this month. So this is something we really find need to emphasize a lot, right? Because Apatov 3 is so much about experience, and even in our advanced and foundational seminars and other programs, we've enhanced that experience since we've developed Apatov 3. So that's, the mind, the senses. Experience, communicate your experience so others get you. I don't need to preach to you about this, right? So then that, that can become the whole touchy-feely New Age thing. So that's why we use the terminology like, yeah, but that's not the complete picture of conscious living. It's foundational, but it's not the complete picture. So we experience our experience on the foundation, in the context of processing that experience, in the context of living on purpose. Now, I mean, that's language we use secularly, but it means in the context of what we hear from Shabda Brahman, whatever the
context of what we heard, yeah.
Because otherwise,
we lead probably nowhere.
yeah. Okay. Well, I had an experience today, so okay, if I process my experience not in the context of Brahman, then okay, well, really, the greatest joy available is playing tennis. Okay. Because I played tennis and I had a sensory experience. Well, that was good. I liked it. Okay. So then, but then we see like, well, no, actually, if you process that in terms of Shabda Brahman, you see that in itself, I mean, that can have a place. You take care of the vehicle like that, but that's not really going to turn the soul to it. It's not really going to liberate you from the process of birth, death, old age, and disease, like that. So that's why we say, so to experience our experience, which, let's say, in our conditioned stage, it's the material pratyaksha. It's not the direct experience that Krishna is talking about when he says this process is direct experience. I mean, it could be part of that continuum, but it's not the highest level of spiritual knowledge talked about here. So experience our experience, even on a material platform, that has its place. Right? our experience and how we process it. It's not always wrong. It has its place. I just say, like, oh, if I smoke cigarettes, I have an experience, and I can see that, you know, actually, yeah, actually, it's not giving me fulfillment. It's more of an escape or whatever. And so, but not to trust, not to be solipsistic, a radical subjectivist, where all we have is our experience. That's the only source of knowledge. No, it's one source of knowledge. It's not useless, and it's very, very fallible. It's very fallible. And so that's why we want to become really expert philosophically, intellectually in what's Shabda Brahman. And that's why we're grateful for our current link to the Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. He gives us Shabda Brahman. And then our experience and our interpretation, our analysis, our inference, we want to see, does that confirm Shabda Brahman? And it might supplement, it might confirm. Where it doesn't, my experience does not confirm Shabda Brahman. Okay, then spiritual intelligence means I accept Shabda Brahman, not my experience. And so Prajaksha and Anumana, our experience and our interpretation, analysis of experience, it can support, it can supplement, it can reinforce the realizations from Shabda Brahman, but it can never supplant it. It never replaces it. It's never higher than it. And this is a key point that, let's call it, the New Age doesn't get, and that we get from Shabda Brahman when we understand the relative efficacy, the relative strength and validity of different ways of knowing.
Yeah. Is there also another dimension to that, which is like if it's done purely, the experience, your experience, it's really done purely. That just by that process, one could come to the, like the level of knowledge. It's a long, arduous path. It's a difficult path. Nobody in Kali Yoga is qualified for that path. Put that aside, and it seems that path in itself is a path.
It's a path.
And that's a path that doesn't lead to Krishna's lotus feet, doesn't lead to that higher level of transcendental knowledge of Krishna. However, it seems that it's a path that could come to lead to liberation.
It can lead to realization, I'm not my body, I'm not my experience. Like Descartes' process was kind of like that.
Yeah, it didn't go all the way though. But if like someone go even more purely and more like I'm not my fault, he stop at I think so, I am. So if you come like you're experiencing my experience of my faults, experiencing all that, then it will come to like, okay, I'm the experiencer. And then there is a complete liberation there in that stage of really like experiencing my experience and only identifying as the experiencer. That's complete liberation from the experience. And yeah, it seems that it will lead to Brahman realization, complete Brahman's platform. And that Brahman platform is just Brahman platform.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I think a lot of the Buddhist process, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, or the Bhagavad Gita. Each time like Arjuna asks question, and I think what Krishna is presenting is that yes, it's possible, but it's arduous, it's difficult, and most of the time people are going to fail. And all you can do is to worship me directly, and then you will go in a higher level.
Yeah. Klesho tesham avyakta shatas avyakta sakti avyakta hi gatir dukam Krishna says it's possible, but very difficult. It is a path, and it would seem, because you can say, if someone really does experience my experience purely, but that's not easy, because conditioned life means I'm suggested, I'm susceptible to mistakes, illusion, limitations, and cheating.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
You know, I'm saying, like, if we put that aside, like the fact that it's practically impossible probably in Kali Yoga because of our limitation and our senses are being agitated. Yeah.
yeah, right. So that's why we stress, experience our experience within the context of living purposefully. If we make that more concrete, is serving, self-realization, devotional service, the soul turning towards itself, turning towards source. Yeah, and then we have a reference through which to process, interpret, analyze, and our experience. Otherwise, it just becomes an absolute relativism and that sort of thing.
Process, analyze according to the goal. And if not process, analyze according to the goal, it becomes absolute relativism.
Yes. Right.
You mean, like, if someone purely experiences their experience, they will come to a place of being the experiencer, but without knowing that goal of being the experiencers, they couldn't arrive there?
Well, I'm talking about, it's rare that someone will come to that goal of realizing fully who they are as not the body. And so that the different sense perceptions and subtle mental thoughts and intellectual processes that we're noticing them, we're experiencing them in the context of what we hear from Shabda Brahman, of the transcendental roadmap. Otherwise, even if someone, who's like much more advanced than Kali Yuga goes through that process, all right, they'll come to a realization, I'm not the body. Now, like the Buddhist process, they won't come to a realization of who they positively are.
Mm-hmm.
The Shankaracharya process, they'll come to a realization of who they positively are. Okay, right. But then there's then what? Then desires will come, and we're back in the material sphere, and we're entangled in the drama of thinking I'm my experience, because the desires are there. And
That's what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita. But if you go to the other path, then at one point or another, you're going to fall down back in the pool of material desire. Maybe you will be a humanitarian, or maybe you will be altruism, go into altruism, and we can see that, practically.
Right. Anyway, so there's this there's this bothersome thing called desire, and then that's going to keep coming up. So even if I'm not the body, so
going to go away, yeah.
So my desire, if it's not directed towards serving the root of the tree, it's going to be directed towards matter.
Mm. What about Sukadev Goswami? All the four Kumaras that were Brahman realized.
Yeah, so they did it, they succeeded, and then from that platform, they transformed their desire in the direction of Vishnu and Vaikuntha and Krishna.
But
Because
before
they,
that, what was happening with their desire before that?
well, I don't know how long of a period that was.
Mm.
I don't know how long of a period they were wandering in space, not under the gravitational force of any material or spiritual planet. And so, we can understand that Shukadeva Goswami, so he was on that Brahmin platform in the womb of his mother, and so that's why he didn't want to come out. But even then, he would only come out when Vyasadeva brought Krishna. So something was there between him and Krishna already.
Mm-hmm.
Something was there,
Mm-hmm.
right? So some seed of maybe Santa Ras was already there. Okay. And then when he came out, so then he just walked away. And so, so Brahman, maybe it's a low level of Santa Ras when someone's in Brahman, but completely non-envious. And then Shukadeva, he was in the forest and he heard some Bhagavatam verses. And then he became attracted.
Shukadeva Goswami didn't hear the Bhagavatam in the womb of his mom.
Well, he heard from Krishna. Vyasadeva brought Krishna there. So and Krishna encouraged him to come out, saying, don't worry, you'll be protected. You won't get into Maya. So whether he heard the Bhagavatam there, maybe. I mean, we hear about, in the Bhagavatam, it describes after he came out, he kind of heard the Bhagavatam in the forest, and then he heard the complete Bhagavatam from his father after he came out of the womb.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe when he was in the womb, he also heard it from his father. At the same time, we don't hear that he was.
But that's not when he become a devotee. It's not like he's not born a devotee. He's still born as an impersonalist when he's just born and at 16-year-old.
Impersonalist at the same time. He clearly had some relation with Krishna, because he wouldn't come out till Krishna came and encouraged him in that direction. Yeah, and it's an interesting, because in the Bhagavatam, in the 7th chapter, 1st canto, it's described that before Vyasadeva taught the Bhagavatam to Shukadeva Goswami, he revised it. So it's not like the Bhagavatam didn't exist, but it specifically says he revised it. He did a updated, more complete edition. So it existed before. It's not like before he had the conversation with Narada Muni, there was no Bhagavatam, but he kind of revised it in the complete edition for our Yuga, and then he taught it to Shukadeva. So maybe in the womb, Shukadeva did hear a preliminary draft, possibly.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe I'll read another page, okay? Shamasundar, in other words, the thought content comes from higher authorities. Then you apply your senses and the two combine. So that's experience your experience and process it within the context of Shabda Brahman, of higher life purpose. That's what Kant's coming to. That's what Shamasundar said. Prabhupada, to come to some conclusion, that is the source of knowledge which is beyond my senses. Shamasundar, but I use my senses to come to some conclusion. Okay, we read that. Okay, and then Shamasundar, after Prabhupada says, Prabhupada says, this is conclusion. By applying your senses and reason that there are two things, material and spiritual. So if there is possibility of material world, why is there not possibility of spiritual world? Shamasundar, and if I see a dead body, I can understand that there is no life in that body. So there must be some source of life. Prabhupada, That is preliminary knowledge, that something is missing. Something is missing. Now there are arguments, so many things, but something that we understand from higher authority, that this something is eternal. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that avinasi tutadvidi yeng sarvam dam tata. That consciousness is spread all over my body. And he says that is avinashi, eternal. Consciousness is spiritual. So then you can judge how it is eternal. Now eternal, the same way that I'm existing, I exist. I existed in a childhood body, boyhood body, so my consciousness is continuing. Consciousness is going on with my existence. I am existing. Despite different changes of body, I am existing. Therefore, consciousness exists. This kind of, you have to apply your senses. But the basic principle of the knowledge is received from higher authorities. Just like in mathematics, teacher says 2 plus 2 is equal to 4. So you take 4 things, make 2 and 2, and you find 4. Similarly, by applying your senses, reason, God has given you reason, consciousness, you can come to the conclusion. Yes. Shamasundar, is there any such thing as innate knowledge? Prabhupada, innate knowledge means that knowledge which you are cultivating, that is already there. Shamasundar, for instance, if you are unable to receive knowledge from a higher authority, could you still somehow have this knowledge inside? Prabhupada, yes, inside there is. We say Chaitya Guru, Krishna is within. Shamasundar. So one could understand about Krishna perhaps if he was unable to receive from outside. Prabhupada, Krishna is everything, outside and inside. Inside he is Paramatma, outside he is spiritual master. So Krishna is trying to help the conditioned soul both ways, outside and inside. Therefore, spiritual master is representative of Krishna. Krishna comes outside of spiritual master, and inside he is personally there. Okay. Yeah, so we talked about our main epistemology is Shabda Brahman, but also our epistemology, our philosophy is that it's not the blank slate, not just, but like we intrinsically not just have, but we are the chit potency. We're intrinsically full of knowledge, and that's why we emphasize that our process. It's a process of cleansing the diamond. The diamond is always bright and full of knowledge, effulgent and strong, and so it's an uncovering process. It's a cleansing process. So knowledge is within, and through Shabda Brahman, the natural knowledge within is awakened. So someone said, well, because you don't need a guru. You have knowledge within you. You have knowledge within you. So that's not wrong. But then the thing is, yeah, okay. And all right, so on my own, how connected am I with that? On my own, how connected am I with that shining lamp of knowledge within? Yeah, that's there. And maybe you're like infallibly connected with it. Good. But yeah, on my own, I tend to be pretty distant from that. And so a true spiritual teacher is infallibly connected with that highest knowledge within. And through association and hearing from the realized spiritual teacher, then we awaken our knowledge within, we connect with it fully.
I remember in Montreal when I read The Science of Self-Realization in French. I had such a potent experience of knowledge that I had in my heart that were on paper now. And not that I had in my heart and I was consciously knowing it.
Yeah.
At the same time, when reading the book, I remember it was so tangible of an experience. When reading the book, really feel like, wow, that's the knowledge of my heart.
Yeah, in State College, I had that experience with Science of Self-Realization. What you just said, I could say the same thing. I think that was the first book I read of Srila Prabhupada, and I had that experience, and I couldn't explain why, but it was like non-different from what's in my heart, and yeah, yeah. So it's a potent book for both of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it was really tangible. Like, wow, it's just putting words to something I felt inside. Or, yeah, not that I could have explained it myself before reading the book, but when I read the book, it's like coming home.
Yeah, I completely relate to that particular book at State College. And yeah, during my prashad taking days, I was reading some of the small books. I think that was the first one. I had that experience with Science of Self-Realization.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Mm.
Okay, I appreciated our discussion. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hi, Krishna.